good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm so pleased to see so many of you here this evening. I think we're in for a real treat, it has to be said. I'm so pleased that Helen, who's produced this marvellous painting for us, is here tonight to really help us to understand a little bit more about this piece of artwork. It does tell a story. And for me, my story in connection with this piece of artwork was that from the moment I walked into this church, which was quite a long time ago now, I've been here 7 years, but on my interview it was in January, it was snowy, I walked in with Frank and Mary Mitchell and was surprised to know that there wasn't actually something of the Trinity here in Holy Trinity. And really, for a long time, since I've been here, I wanted to find the right piece of artwork that would help all of us to grow in our faith, to understand more about God. And it was through a very interesting chain of events, as God so often works when we look back and see how people are put into our pathways along the way, that actually I came to meet Helen. What a fantastic and God-given moment that was, that came about. And we were looking for a piece of artwork, and she just happened to be looking to paint a piece of artwork. So it was a match made in heaven, really. So I'm really grateful that so many of you are here this evening. I see this piece of artwork being in this church for a very, very long time. And we will carry that story with us for generations to come, I hope. So it's really great that we've got our artists here this evening to really take us on that journey and to help us to explain to others, whether they're new people in the village or young people, actually the significance of the Holy Trinity and how our God is depicted through this piece of artwork. This evening we're also raising money, as we always do. We never do anything in church, do we, without raising money. And this evening, quite a lot of our money will be going to Helen's chosen charity for this evening. I better get this right. It's Aid to the Church in Need. It supports all denominations of persecuted Christians across the world. And of course, at the moment, the greatest need is in places like Iraq and Syria. So we are also, whilst we're here enjoying the evening and learning, we're also supporting those Christians across the world who are finding it very, very difficult to express their faith and actually to just live their faith. So, I hope you really enjoy this. The way that we're going to do this evening, I'm going to hand over to Helen. Helen's going to have about 40 minutes to talk through the piece of artwork. There's going to be then an opportunity for questions and answers. So if through the talk you think to yourself, actually I'd like to know a bit more about that, or I have a question for Helen, now's the time. Don't be asking me on Sunday, because I'll say, I don't know. You should have asked Helen on Thursday. So if you do have questions, that would be lovely. So we'll have an opportunity to ask some questions and hear some answers at the end of the talk. And then we'll have some nibbles and some wine, and you can circulate, look at the painting, talk to Helen yourself. But it gives me great pleasure. Would you give Helen a very warm welcome? Helen.
I hope so.
Excellent.
I hope everyone can hear me at the back. Is that good? Yeah. Thank you, Penny, for many things, but certainly for that kind introduction. Before we go any further, it's a time to say a very special thank you to the Holiday family who made this commission possible. I kept them in my prayers during the making of this, and when you come before this artwork in the future, if you could just offer up your loving prayers for that family and for all who are in a moment of bereavement or loss, I think that would be a wonderful healing thing. was indeed a special moment when Penny contacted me. I remember it distinctly. I was in the middle of leading an icon painting retreat at the Anglican shrine in Walsingham, and it was one of those difficult moments, and if any of you are teachers, you might appreciate that there's always a few people in the group, aren't there? And I walked onto the lawn, just to chill for a little bit, and my mobile rang, which is something of a miracle if you know Walsingham, because it's like a total block of any signal up there, apart from the one from above. So I thought, this is strange, a signal's come through, and this distant voice said, "Hello, are you there?" And so I went behind the main altar where the signal is better, ironically, and the explanation was made that Penny was looking for an artwork for her church, the Holy Trinity, in this particular lovely, beautiful village. And I thought, oh, fantastic. Anyway, cut a long story short, it gave me the opportunity to do something that I'd been hatching for a very, very long time. But before I get to my bit of it, I want to try and explain something of the original image, which is of course the masterwork, the world-famous icon by Saint Andrei Rublev, as he's properly known in the Orthodox Church, and explain something of the iconography, a little bit of the theology, the identity of the figures, the symbolism, the historical context surrounding that. We'll look at the formal, we'll look a little bit at the formal qualities of the icon, and that will then segue into what I did for this particular image. So I'm going to apologise to the people directly in front of me, because I'm going to be leaping backwards and forwards to press my projector, but I hope I won't be in the way too much. The original image is almost 5 foot high, and it's on a panel, and it's in the Tretyakov Gallery in Moscow. Has anyone had the privilege of being able to visit? Well, if you ever do get to Moscow, make sure you go to this particular museum. It's a very large panel painting, and it dates from the first quarter of the 15th century. So it's not the oldest icon in the world, but it definitely has enough age to make it a very fragile piece today. I was lucky enough to see it a few years ago. One of my other jobs is cataloguing for a Russian art auction house in Mayfair, and our company was flown out to Moscow to go and view a collection that might be consigned to auction. And I managed to convince my boss, when he was under the influence of too much vodka, that I needed to go to the Tretyakov to see this. That was fun, but it was worth it. So that's the original one. I'm going to just read a quote, so forgive me whilst I just turn my back for a moment. This icon, with its inexhaustible content, harmonious equilibrium, majestically calm angels, light, joyous summer colours, could only be the work of a man who had stilled in his soul all agitation and was illumined by the light of the knowledge of God. And those words were written by the Russian art historian Leonid Uspensky in 1952 in his work on Russian icons, which is a seminal book translated into English. And I think that really sums it up, this idea of someone who stilled his soul against all agitation. And I think that is one of the qualities, one of the many, many qualities that comes through this particular image. And on the left, you'll see a modern contemporary icon of the person who painted it, who, being a saint in the Orthodox Church, also gets his own icon. And you will see, if my little pointy thing works all right, you'll see he's actually holding an image of the icon there. So that's all very neat. And Andrei Rublev was canonised quite recently in 1989. Anyone a fan of Russian cinema? Tarkovsky's 1966 film Andrei Rublev? If you've got 3 hours to spare, or Branded Fever or something, you might want to watch this one. It is actually a masterpiece. It's a subtitled Russian film, and it's about the artist. It's about Andrei Rublev. And it makes it explicitly clear the times that he lived in and the times that the icon was born into. And these were not easy times at all. The image on the bottom is actually taken from the film. And in the film you see lots of destroyed churches, persecuted people, people suffering in all kinds of ways. And I just wanted to contrast that with an image at the top, which was taken, it's a photograph that was taken early this year in Syria. Hey, where's the difference? Well, that's something for us to think about and to pray about. But I just wanted to make that contrast, that we're still living in extremely violent times. This image here, that's also taken in Aleppo, another destroyed church. People clinging on. We don't even know whether these people are still with us. And these are images from the film. And it gets very uncomfortable, because when I first saw that film, we didn't have things like Daesh, we didn't have things like ISIS, we didn't have people being decapitated on the beaches because they were Christian. And I think in these times we're called to be stronger Christians than ever before. This isn't a time to be faint-hearted in our faith, and all denominations need to come together now, and it's a time for barriers to come down and for us to be stronger. And that was very much, I think, one of the sentiments that Rublev wanted to put forward through the icon. So a little bit of Russian history. I've explained that the icon was born into some very difficult times. Let's try and spot some of the differences. The Grand Princes of Moscow were on a land grab. Yep, that's about the same. There were problems hanging over from the Mongol invasion. Of course, that is very much a historical context. In the 13th and 14th century, the Golden Horde invaded parts of Russia and just literally took over. So there was a lot of problems from those kinds of invasions and from people being in flight, refugees from that. You had fiefdoms, you had serfdom, you had the social problems that go with that. You have incredible poverty and incredible wealth. Moving forward to the 16th and the 17th century, you've got characters like Ivan the Terrible and Boris Godunov, who you may know from your dealings with Russian literature and Russian history. They're very colourful people indeed. But they had a great deal of money to spend on icons in the church. And the original icon was embellished by them with certain decorative metal coverings, all very beautifully done with repoussé work and jewels. Jumping forward to the 19th century, the Russians for a long time didn't realise that they had any medieval artistic heritage. When you have an icon and you put it in a church, it gets black from the carbon from the candles, from the particular varnish that is used or was used on icons. It's something called olifa. It's made from linseed oil, and it darkens very rapidly. They couldn't clean the icons, so they renewed them, which means they overpainted them in the 15th, 16th, 17th and 18th century, maybe several times. So every time the icon is repainted, it gets a little bit changed. Styles change according to the period, and before you know it, you've got 5 odd layers of paint, and the original thing is completely and utterly lost and invisible. In the 19th century, towards the end, the academics and scientists in Moscow discovered ways of restoring panel paintings, and very slowly they started to take off the layers of paint. And of course it's always that problem, where do you stop, where do you stop? But they started to realise that there was something underneath it, and they restored many icons, and suddenly they found they had artwork going back to the 14th and 15th centuries and 16th centuries. And suddenly they had the most extraordinary repository of art. Matisse visits in 1907 and is absolutely blown away by this artwork. And this is obviously just before the Russian Revolution. So it was all very exciting with what was happening in the rediscovery of icons, and with that, a Russian identity as well. Post-1917, of course, we're into the Soviet era. And whilst a lot of icons were beginning to become endangered because they were in cold, damp churches, and in Russia you've got a temperature differential of maybe 40 or 50 degrees, but the revolution obviously forbade any religious practice or the painting of icons. So these icons were confiscated, the good ones, and taken into state repositories and what then became state collections. And the churches that the icons had come from were turned into folk museums. They're now undergoing a great deal of revivification. And in fact, a lot of the church leaders are asking for some of their icons back. But it's still a bit of a problem putting something very, very fragile into damp churches. So that just gives you a little bit of a background to that. This is called a riza, or an oklad, and it's one of the metal coverings that went over the original icon. They were very popular in the 19th century as well, and they typically have the faces cut out so you can see the painting underneath, and the hands. And with 19th century icons with those on, sometimes when you take the cover off, that's all you've got, is actually the faces. But those icons can be worth anything up to 50, 60 or 70,000 pounds, depending on who the maker of the frame and the riza was. I mentioned renewals. The Trinity icon has had about 4 or 5 renewals, and it started to get its restorations around 1904. It had a few in the 17th century and the 16th century, but bringing science to bear was one of the main advantages of this period, but they were still getting it a little bit wrong. I don't know whether you'll be able to see it all clearly, but the idea is that all these very heavily stylised figures and all this overpaint is gradually peeled away to reveal the icon that we see today. The bottom right one being the final image that was revealed. And they were using icon painters to actually do that restoration work. Talking of persecution, slightly different aspect to it now, but I cannot talk about the Trinity icon without mentioning this person. I'd like you to meet Alexander Anisimov. Because if it wasn't for this man, we wouldn't have the icon. We wouldn't have the Vladimir Skyer icon. I'm sure you know that one, the Mother of God of Vladimir, the Mother of God of the Don, several other works by Rublev, and a whole raft of other Russian icons. He was an art historian who loved the Novgorodian school of icons and the early work. And he was also a scientist and a conservator. And he was part of a team that went out and brought these masterworks back into state collections. We didn't have much choice, that's what he was being told to do. But he worked on preserving the Trinity icon, he worked on its conservation, he fought to keep it safe, and he published on it. Like most academics, he would write about his research and what he was doing. And he fell foul of the Stalinist authorities because he actually made the mistake of publishing something on paper not produced in the USSR. So for that he got 6 months in a gulag. And he kept falling foul of Stalin. And in the end, sad to say, after 10 years in prison, he was taken outside and shot. So again, we have thanks to give for people like this, who really put themselves out there to try and save artwork for no other reason than that they loved it and they saw the value of it and they didn't want it to be lost. Of course, he's one of millions and millions of people who died needless deaths. It gets a bit more positive, don't it? The Rublev Room. It's not the most exciting place in a museum gallery to visit. It's got these Soviet iron frames around it, a sort of very miserable museum room, and these babushkas who come out and sort of yell at you if you get too close to the cabinets. But once a year at Pentecost, the Trinity icon, which is in the cabinet here, is taken out and taken into a church that was specially built for the Tretyakov Gallery. And the Trinity icon in the Russian Orthodox Church is used particularly at Pentecost, the Feast of Pentecost. Now, in the Catholic and the Anglican Church, we celebrate the Feast of the Trinity a week after, usually, the Feast of Pentecost. But in the Russian Church, they see it as the Pentecost is a manifestation of the Trinity, the Holy Spirit, God the Father and God the Son. So it's very much allied to that particular feast, the Trinity and the Pentecost. So try and hold that in your mind if you can. So what about the icon itself? It was commissioned for the wonderful monastery of St. Sergius of Radones, which is near Moscow. St. Sergius of Radones was an extraordinary saint, and I haven't got time to talk about him now. You can go and Google him tomorrow if you're interested. It's a very, very important figure in the Russian Church. The icon is first mentioned in 1551. There was a synod, the Council of 100 Chapters, and they really rated this icon. This is how all icons should be painted. Our man Rublev has got it just so right. And he's a model icon painter, and everyone else should follow this model. So that's high praise indeed, my goodness. You know, it's very difficult to please the synod, especially if you're an artist, but he obviously is, rocking that. So it's canonically correct. And once an icon is deemed correct by the church, it can be copied, and all the copies thereafter are deemed to sort of carry that veracity with it. They are something that can be venerated. We don't worship an image, of course not, we venerate an image. It's a bit like coming before an image of Buddha. You're not worshipping Buddha, well I'm not, but if you're coming before an image like that, you're acknowledging, you're respecting, you're making a connection in your mind with the thing that's being represented, okay? You're not worshipping it. So the icon of icons. Where does it come from? Genesis 18, it's chapters 1 to 8. It's the story of Abraham, who is sitting by his tent in the heat of the day, and he receives a visit from 3 men, and he greets them in a very particular way. I'll read it to you. The Lord appeared to Abraham by the oaks of Mamre, as he sat at the entrance of his tent in the heat of the day. He looked up and he saw 3 men standing near him. When he saw them, he ran from the tent entrance to meet them and bowed down to the ground. He said, "My Lord, if I find favour with you, do not pass by your servant." Anybody interested in grammar here? You spot the use of the first person singular? It's not you plural, is it? No. It's you singular. And it's this one thing that gives, if you like, one of the bases for seeing the 3 in oneness. Now, in the Russian Church, the idea of representing God the Father is basically a no-no. We have images of the Lord Sabaoth, the sort of old man of creation, which is taken to be a personification of Christ. But basically, representing the New Testament Trinity was not possible. So any ideas of God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit couldn't really happen in the Orthodox Church. So Rublev's way around it was to use this analogy. And this is why the Russian Church thought this was the icon of icons, because it's a very neat solution to seeing the Trinity, the whole concept of the Trinity, within this Old Testament story. So a little closer look at some of the iconography. So I'll point to this as well. You've got the The oak of Mamre behind, which you can see as the tree of life. You can see that as a prefiguration of the wood of the cross. Of course, the cross can be seen as the tree of life, as it was in the very early days of Christian iconography. You have a mountain. Mountains are always very important. You have a building which looks a bit like a church building. If you look at Russian icons of the 15th century, it has a sort of churchy kind of quality to it. You have an altar table. This square little aperture, that's thought to be an aperture for a relic. So that's how we know it's an altar. But the reliquary repository, if you like, is empty, which is interesting. I'm sure there's plenty that you could read into that. We have this Eucharistic dish with what thought to be a calf or a calf's head in it, so immediately analogous with the Eucharist and the sacrifice that Christ will make. So as I said, the angels, the idea of angels, these three figures, are a very useful way of representing the New Testament Trinity. Abraham and Sarah have been taken out of the story. This is one of the key things that Rublev does. He simplifies things. And it's always the same rule, isn't it? Keep it simple, stupid. Take everything out. Keep the history out of it so that you've got something that's a little bit more eternal and long-lasting. Now, identifying the persons of the Trinity. I've had a chat this evening already with someone about this, and there's two schools of thought. One of the schools of thought is that the figure here in pink is God the Father, and this figure in the green outer robe is the Holy Spirit. Maybe. This could be God the Father because he's sitting in front of a church. Okay, that's possible. The figure in the middle, I think without any doubt, most people are agreed it is a figure of the second person of the Trinity, Christ. Let's just talk about that for a moment. Look at the painting, it's a bit clearer. This shoulder stripe, it's called a clavis. It comes from imperial or late imperial dress. It's a status symbol. He's wearing a sort of purpley red imperial robe. Christ is king. Most importantly, he has two fingers gesturing towards the Eucharistic bowl. Now this, in Russian iconography, represents his two natures. It's a blessing gesture, of course, but it is the two natures of Christ, both God and both man. Equally God, equally man. Okay, and of course he's in front of the tree. He's also seated at the right hand of this figure. Now, in my understanding, Christ sits at God's right hand. God, for me, and for what I've read, is always met on a mountain. How many mountains can you think of? Sinai, where the first law is given. And this, of course, is analogous to the New Testament Trinity, where the new law is given, isn't it? So you've got ideas about God meeting man on mountains. Christ goes up the Mount of Olives. You've got Mount Horeb. You've got the whole lot, the Transfiguration, all on mountains, always on a mountain. This figure, when I paint it, and I've painted this icon many, many times, this figure on the left, he has to be treated so differently. It's not just because the paint has been restored and it's got thin with age. It has a diaphanous quality. There's two lots of colour on the robe alone. Actually, there's three. But if you look at the original, it's got what's called a double colour reflection, which has got this beautiful coral light pink. It's very spiritual and ethereal. But it's also got this sort of blue, heavenly colour floating on top of it. And it just seems so much lighter, so much more emblematic of the Holy Spirit for me. And because this figure is in front of a church-like building, I read it, and some read it, as that this is the Holy Spirit, the Paraclete, who of course will infuse the church from Pentecost. It's a post-Pentecostal image. to be honest, I don't think it matters which one is God the Father, which one is the Holy Spirit. You bring your own interpretation to it. You please engage with this image in whatever way you like, because that is the correct way. I'm just giving you a few ideas to get into it with. As angels, of course, they've all got their angelic staff, okay? And what you can't see terribly clearly because they've been lost is they've got these very neat little hairbands. And in the original, they probably would have had little ribbons showing, and that's their antennae, which they pick up the messages. You might see other icons of angels with that motif. And of course today, I don't know if it's the same in your church, but in our church it's the feast of the archangels today. So that's a nice segue. Okay. The panel you have, and this is another weird coincidence. Are there any coincidences with God? Discuss. Penny gave me the measurements to replace the lovely Duccio, which I happen to like a great deal, on the wall. But the measurements are exactly 25% smaller than the original Rublev icon. Hey, how about that? So it was a very easy matter for me just to scale down the draft of the original. It's like I already had the draft design. I've painted this, as I said, many times. So I just had to play around at the printers and actually get it enlarged to a certain size. And I knew the proportions would be right, so I thought, this is a good sign. This is a really good sign. The other big difference is that Rublev painted on a wooden panel in tempera. And if you're not sure what tempera is, it's pure mineral colours, powdered mineral colours, bound in an egg yolk emulsion. And that's normally what I would use, and it's my preferred medium for painting. And that paint medium is applied onto a gessoed surface on top of the aforementioned wooden panel. And any gilding is done before you paint. So if I'm making an icon of the Trinity, I normally do all the gilding, having put the design down, of course, and then I do the painting. So I might have done a week's work before I even pick up a paintbrush. The background would have had some gold on in the past, and you can see where it's actually been sort of stripped off. So with yours, I had to do it in oils, because that was what was given in the brief. And I hadn't painted, I'd tell Penny now, I hadn't painted in oils for 25 years.
You've done very well.
I did do a warm-up painting beforehand, but basically this was, okay, are my paintbrushes still around? Are they, still workable? But they were, and it was absolutely lovely to work on a canvas, and the canvas was specially made by a canvas manufacturer in central London. It was the most beautiful canvas. It was a real quality piece, so you've got a good deal. I mentioned the draft design. Normally when I'm either composing an icon, and I do a lot of that for churches and cathedrals all the way around the world, I will use a bit of geometry and standard geometric shapes like the circle, squares and triangles to help me compose a sacred image. All icons are composed on a cross. So you will see, or you will find, under the structure of every icon, that you can almost trace a cross. You won't be able to see it, but you can imagine it. You can superimpose it when you look at an icon. Always, there's an equal-armed cross. What I tend to do is I use the corners and I work diagonals, and I get these sorts of shapes. And that gives me some proportion to start aligning the positions of the figures to and within. It gives me a balance. The one thing about icons is that they're used for meditation. So you need to create an image that has a stillness and a calmness and a symmetry which is going to hold the human eye and then lead on to thinking and feeling other things. So that's why there's a system of using sacred geometry. So this idea, what was this idea that I had that had been lurking away for so many years that came to the fore when Penny phoned me on the lawn at Walsingham? Well, a long time ago, I was muddling around in my drawer. I have a massive drawer full of designs and colour copies and bits and bobs that I've used in my icon making process. And one day I will file these. I'll put all my Virgin Marys in one pile, all my angels in another pile, all my saints, and I'll divide them into female saints, martyrs. I'll get it all sorted out, but it's going to take a while. One of the things I do is I stuff designs into those pocket folders. And I've done, as I said, this icon many times, and I've also done sections of it. And I've painted the left-hand figure as a separate thing for people, just as an isolated image. And I've drawn up the draft design, I've photocopied it, I shoved it in the folder, along with the acetate that I've traced in. So I've got an acetate, absolutely transparent film with the draft design on, that somehow got put in back to front and overlaid another one of the images. You won't be able to see it very clearly. There's actually 3 faces there. Right, now you know what I'm beginning to drive at. I felt, I knew instinctively that there was more behind this icon than I was seeing with my physical eyes. I knew about sacred geometry. I knew there was more there. I thought one day I'm going to get a chance to explore this, and maybe it'll be the angel with 3 faces. Well, I'm sure you're very glad you haven't got an angel with 3 faces, because it's a bit weird, and us artists get a bit carried away. We need to be taken into the corner and slapped and told to calm down. But suffice to say, I was seeing things, and that's what you always want an artist to see, I suppose. That still didn't give me what you've got there. So having persuaded, bullied, tortured your poor Penny into saying, yeah, we'll basically have a look at whatever you produce, we'll have faith, we'll go along with you, we have no idea what we're going to get, but we'll give you the benefit of the doubt, and bless you all for your prayers, and for Penny for saying yes. I always like people who say yes. Because I sat down, and I know that your prayers were with me. Because I sat down in front of this beautiful canvas, and I just sketched out the angels, and I was very pleased with myself. Always a bad sign for an icon painter. So I'd managed to sketch in freehand all the angels, and it was correct. And I thought, it looks just the same as Rublos the Trinity. There's no difference there then. It's supposed to be doing something new and modern. It's going to be a modernistic Trinity. And I started looking at it. And I am being completely honest. I'd drawn in some lines to help me position the figures. And I started to see things in these lines. The first line that I saw was, of course, the cross. You can actually see it underneath if you look very carefully. I used a charcoal pencil and I ruled that in, and I had my diagonals, which you can also see faintly. But I started to see other shapes, and then it's one of those epiphanies where you nearly fall off your chair and you go, oh my goodness me. Because I knew it was there. You have the cross, you have the Star of David, you have the Slavic or Russian cross, and you have, of course, the circle. But if you slightly misalign the circle, you've also got a crescent shape, and I thought, oh my goodness, we've got all the symbols of all the Abrahamic faiths. Yeah, that's what's coming through for me. This is important, because this is a new way of using this image. Here now, in the period that we're living in now. All our faiths are interconnected. We're all interconnected as people. We might try an other, and heaven's sake, we've done enough of that in the previous centuries, haven't we? But we are all connected, and this image shows us, with the way the angels are sitting around the table, their unity. It's all about an interconnectedness. So the universal circle. The circle is the oldest symbol we have as human beings. You can see God in the circle. God is everywhere within that idea of eternity, perfection. You have the beautiful balanced Star of David with those two equilateral triangles, and the way they bisect the figures and cut into the painting and section it up, it actually makes squares and other shapes, which I find in an abstract way very satisfying. You've got the Greek cross, the Latin cross, and the Slavic cross. I wasn't able to do the sort of angles footrest on the Slavic cross because it did look a bit odd. But that's the idea, that the three crosses from the three Christian denominations are also present within this painting. And then with the circles overlapping, the crescent moon of Islam, because Islam doesn't really have any particular symbols because it doesn't use images in the same way. But it's our reference for Islam. My problem then was how to make these manifest. And my first idea was, well, maybe when I paint the angels, I can pick out the Star of David in blue, referencing the flag of Israel, and then I can have the Russian cross in red and the Greek cross in gold, and you get the idea of where I'm going. But I thought, nah, that's just naff. It's going to look rubbish. Those colours aren't going to show because we've got very bright blues and bright greens and reds already. So I thought, I know where this is going. I'm going to have to use chrysography. That's a technique we use in icon painting to pick out gold detail. It's like a sort of stylized light pattern that you see on robes and garments in an icon. And Duccio, the reproduction at the back, has those kind of chrysography patterns on the Madonna's robe. So you can appreciate that a little bit more. So I thought, okay, I'll do the painting, and that went so well. That went so beautifully. It just happened without me really doing anything. I'm sure I wasn't there. I think it just got painted all by itself. And then I had this job to try and get the gold stuck on. So I used a sort of sticky varnish, which we call size, and I carefully brushed it into place. Then I had my gilder's equipment, my gilder's cushion, 23-carat loose sheets of gold leaf, and I cut it into little sections, and I did the whole Russian thing. I've got little bits of bread all screwed up to pick up the bits of gold leaf and touching it to the varnished lines. Oh my goodness, that went on for days. And there was gold everywhere, it was going there. That's when it started to get a bit pear-shaped. But anyway, we managed to tidy it up, and it worked. And if you catch it in a certain light, you will see the gold sparkle. If you see it in another light, you won't see the gold sparkle, you'll see a very sort of dull, ochreish sort of colour. But gold, of course, is a symbol of eternity. It's the one metal that never changes. It is the metal of divinity, if you like. So that's why I picked out the symbols in gold. So, obviously, a photograph of what you're seeing. Before we read the prayer together, I'd just like to ask you, you don't have to answer me, but I'd just like to invite you to think of ways that you might explain this image to other people, ways that you might start to maybe go out of your comfort zone to embrace, not physically, but intellectually and emotionally, a greater spirit of ecumenicism in these particular times that we're at now. How much more can we do? There's always something more left that we can do. Can we be braver? Can we go out and build a few bridges, even if it's only just smiling at someone we don't particularly like? I've just come back from Assisi, leading a Franciscan painting retreat. And one of the sisters in the place that I stay, she was trying to organise a cab for me and my students to go somewhere. And it got a bit political with all these cab drivers. And she said, she's American, Helen, this might be the city of peace, but we work at it. And I thought, she's right. Peace doesn't just fall into our hands like some great fluffy toy. Peace has to be worked at every day, every hour, by people making concessions, biting their tongue, being patient. You know this, I don't have to tell you this. You know this, but it's good to be reminded that at this point where we need peace so badly, so very, very badly in the Middle East, that we've got to give our prayers to those people, that somehow they can keep working at it and we can get it. We can have peace. We know it's possible. So if you'd just like to sort of focus your minds on that, I'm just going to read this prayer that's attributed to St. Francis, and then we'll conclude. Thank you. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. Amen. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Helen, thank you so much. That was just wonderful. I feel like just this evening I've gone on a journey. So, no, I've certainly been taken to thoughts that I didn't know were there, and this painting just constantly continues to reveal things to me. So, very, very grateful for your talk. Now, ladies and gentlemen, was there anything in that talk that you thought, oh, I'd like to know a bit more about that, or I didn't quite understand that, or she used this word, and what on earth does that mean? This is your opportunity to ask some questions, or if you just, I don't know, like to ask them what her favourite colour is. I don't know, you know, it's entirely up to you. So, anybody here got a question that they'd like to ask Helen this evening? Oh, good.
Helen, I did a painting in 20 minutes this morning, watercolour.
Oh, very good!
Could you tell us how long it took you to paint?
How long did it take you to paint this beautiful piece of artwork?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't watch the clock when I'm painting it. The figures were painted very, very quickly. And I suppose we are talking several days, it might have even gone into a week. It was the gilding that took me a long time to do it. So I honestly don't know, because I go into another zone, so I don't have no idea.
Follow that up? These artists, they just go into an ethereal world.
No, we're total pain, antisocial, awful people.
I don't think it was like 20 minutes though, to be fair. Mike?
Helen, I was wondering, are there lots of other icons of the Holy Trinity, and you particularly chose this one to copy it?
Yes, there are dozens and dozens of images of the Old Testament Trinity. You will see variants, particularly in the Russian schools, with images of Abraham and Sarah and the servant killing the fatted calf. You will see lots of them. If you go to Google Images and put in Old Testament Trinity icon, you know, that they will come up. What made me choose this one? I suppose because I knew it very well, but also because there was this little idea that had been kicking around for years in the back of my head, that there was so much more to this icon. And I haven't even scratched the surface with all its meanings tonight. There's an awful lot written on it, but it was this, I don't know, this sort of curiosity, this need to pull out something. It was like an itch, if you like, that needed to be scratched, if that's a rather crude way of putting it, but it needed to be made manifest, this thing, this idea, this concept.
Yeah. Thank you. Any other questions? Oh, good. Right there.
When the paintings were removed in the Soviet era,
Yes.
were they on public display or were they hidden away, and were they looked after, and did the people removing them understand their values?
Oh, that's a lot of questions. They were when they were safe to put on public display, they were put on display with the context of this is folk art from a different era. That was the message that was being put up there. But of course, for a lot of people, they hadn't lost their faith, and it was a bit of an underground movement. The value, I think the Russians did understand the value. I mean, they had copies done, so that they had official copies made for the sites that the churches were coming from. And they were aware of the whole concept of conserving something precious. But of course, the value now is just gone crazy. Icons have become a commodity. Hence my work in the Russian Icon House. So it's it's a very different world now with these things. And of course, in the 70s, the Soviets were shipping crates of icons to London. They're coming through Heathrow. They're arriving in great big wooden crates. And I know dealers who would go to Heathrow, take off the lids and just pull out what they wanted, because the Russians were trying to raise money for their 5-year plans. And now, of course, if you sell an icon, it goes back to Russia. It'll never come out again. They're not allowed to export them. So the whole concept has changed in recent years, and Russia is very interested in getting back all the refugee icons that left Russia just before the revolution, and getting them back into state collections and looking after them properly. So that's still a thing that's going on, and very, very precious work it is too.
Good. Any other questions for Helen this evening? Where are we? Oh, Yvonne.
I find the position of the feet very interesting, because the central figure is looking towards his right. The feet are very definitely on the left. On his left, sorry, on the right.
Yes.
And then somehow there's a sort of the connection all around.
They're strange postures. I mean, we know that Rublev is taking his influence from Byzantine art of the 14th century, the Paleologian period, which had a lot of classical Greek ideas still within it. So there's an elegance to these figures in the way that they're arranged, and their bodies are very elongated and stylized. And if you stood these creatures up, they're being possibly stretched out and tall, stretching up to God. But with the crossed feet, sometimes you can see it as analogous to the crucifixion. But that's usually more explicit on, say, icons of the Mother of God, which is called in the Russian Church, holding the infant Christ, and his feet are crossed. And he might have a bare shoulder where he would carry the cross. But you can see it in lots of different ways.
Anybody else have a question this evening for Helen? So, Sean.
Maybe later during refreshments.
Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to have a glass of wine or a glass of juice. Some nibbles have been made for us, which is lovely. I'd encourage you all just to come forward, have a drink, come close to the painting and have a look at it. Come close to Helen, not too close, but come and say hello to Helen, and if there's any questions that you don't necessarily want to discuss in this round, please do ask Helen. And we'll sort of hang around and enjoy each other's company. But do have a closer look at the painting. And just like to offer a round of applause to Helen, our fantastic artist. Thank you very much.